Oki. Naganago, Meko Che Che Sukomaki. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she and her pronouns. I'm speaking to you on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south of the imposed US Canadian border are the Blackfeet. North of the border are the Siksika, Gunai, and Bagani of the Confederacy. These lands are Treaty 7, signed September 22nd, 1877, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Wesley, Chiniki, and Bearspaw Nations of the Stoney Nations, and the Dene from Tsuut'ina. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit, status, and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. All non-Indigenous are treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as a guest, acknowledging your role as a treaty partner in a so-called time of reconciliation, and more. It's important land acknowledgements have meaning. I encourage all to introduce themselves with their acknowledgement of their ancestors, stories of displacement, and how you perceive your role as a treaty partner, a citizen of Canada, a refugee, or other land displacement, so we as Indigenous people know how safe you are to be around. If you don't know how to pronounce your local Indigenous nation's name, won't say your story of origin, won't acknowledge stolen lands, won't acknowledge imposed economic oppression or your role in reconciliation, I determine how safe you are to be around my family, my community, and myself. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance is Indigenous 101 because it immediately addresses colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught in Canadian schools nationally. That's why settlers and those who call themselves Native Calgarians show me you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake tribe in Treaty 11. My people wore rabbit skin, so it's been referred to as the land of the Hare people. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene Nation is a visitor to this area of Clincho Tine Intahe in Satu Dene, meaning big dog, many big dog horse, or many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary, or in Blackfoot Mohkinstsis, as Michelle Elliott, another English name which has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene, or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution while having a Canadian Indian Act imposed status card, which is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous Two-Spirit, or the Indigenous LGBTQ2+ community, and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socioeconomic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. As a Dene woman who attempted to run after joining harmful colonial parties, spent money to be at expensive conventions, left my home to travel to those conventions just to vote on incomplete policies that still allow incarceration, a denial of justice, denial of health services, racism, colonial trauma, and genocide of Indigenous and Black peoples, I have worked to continue, reports to advocate for, and attempt to work within these systems meant to harm me and my community. I cannot say have a great weekend knowing that my community is dying from current drug policies, imposed Christian-based drug policies of abstinence programming, private healthcare, and justice built on racism, land theft, and imposed British constructs, continuing genocide on Indigenous peoples. Frank Young of Red Earth Cree Nation is still missing, still no Amber Alert. I think of them and so many others as we honor their lives today and every day. I hope you see your role in the importance of stopping harm as a citizen, as a treaty partner in this role of so-called reconciliation. I honor the Blackfoot elders as they've been so kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot, and Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Satu Dene. My humblest apologies to the Blackfoot and Dene elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. Any mistakes or misinterpretations will be on me. I encourage questions so that misunderstandings can be cleared up as soon as possible. I do not speak on behalf of all Indigenous. I just share my journey as I walk down my red road. I've been accused of not being kind while surviving genocide, yet I have given free book clubs, podcasts, and info on my social media for years. and as so many others. At this point, it is willful to be ignorant on these issues. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com. Send in your comments and your questions. Also, giving a review helps, whatever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel where you can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And today I'm quite excited because I have some really cool guests that I want to talk about and plug. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Thank you for having us. My name is Kim Owen, Musco Benatian Sugar. It's a Cree name, so I'm a Neheo from Pipot First Nation in Treaty 4 territory in Saskatchewan. My name was given to me at birth. It means little red bird flying in the rain. Fortunate enough to have a decolonized name, if you will. So I actually grew up in the United States on Pine Ridge Indian Reservation from when I was about 4 until I was about 13. Coming back to Canada, I moved to Calgary, and I'm so blessed to have made this place my home. So I really acknowledge and honor the people in Treaty 7 territory. And I've never, ever been treated better or welcomed as much as I have been by Blackfoot people and the Indigenous people that are originally from this land. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Honored to.
Okay, idamix kanatini. Nidaniko aksabu danaki, nidung pikani. Good morning. My name is Theodora Warrior. My Indian name is Good Shield Woman, and I'm from the Piikani Nation.
Oh. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Continue.
So I was born in Calgary, but did not grow up here. My mother was very nomadic, and she followed a lot of her education. Extremely intelligent woman, 2 bachelors, 2 masters in education. She taught English, the subject, not the language, and she also taught Blackfoot. She was working on a PhD before funding or family life stopped her from doing so. But yeah, so I grew up mostly in Washington State, Seattle. I did grade 2 in Mexico City because she was doing an internship down there. And then mostly between Seattle, Yakima Valley, and our reservation, Piikani, and which is in the southern part of Alberta. So yeah, I had a very interesting childhood and seen a lot of the world at a very young age. And so that exposed me to a lot of different cultures, different perspectives, but ending up back here in Calgary, life took me on a big circle and then ended me up back here. And yeah, and it's really interesting how I came into the position that I'm in and being able to help my people.
Oh,
So
this
thanks
is
for having
great.
me.
I can't wait to talk to you both about just your backgrounds alone. Okay, so I so rudely interrupted you because you were like, oh, I'm Good Shield Woman. I'm like, because I've been working so much with Awutan Healing Lodge, and Awutan, Bruce Scalplog, she talks about her name and it being Shield Woman. So I was like, oh, geez, that connection and kind of hearing what you said, and I was like, oh, that sounds really close. And then you said it, and I'm like, oh, no wonder. So I'm sorry that I interrupted you, and I can't wait to talk to you because, okay, so now 2 things that popped into my head that you just said. You were in Seattle, you grew up there during Robert Pickton, but also Twilight. So I want to talk about that. We'll talk that in a minute, but I want to go back to the fact that you were born and spent a lot of time in Pine Ridge, which is like, all the stuff is going down there that comes from Calgary. So I don't know how political you want to get, for sure. So if you want to elaborate on any of those things, you're welcome to. Or if you want to do bubblegum kind of things about Twilight, I'm totally down for that. But also, I really want you both to have the floor about the great work you're doing. And I'm really glad that you're on here to talk about that today too.
I love Twilight, by the way. It's one of my favorite movies. I could talk about Twilight for the whole hour.
Okay, perfect. Now, screw work. Let's talk about Twilight. I'm just kidding. Well, just real quick though, what happened with me was my daughter was born, and you know how they have those growth spurts, and she would nurse like crazy, and I'd be like wide awake at 3 a.m. So I would just read all the Twilight books, and that's how come I read them. So that, and then I've had obviously a very different picture of what the werewolves were, obviously. But and then when it came out, I was like, oh, I can't. Yeah, I had very different thoughts. Great thing about a book.
Actually, way back in the day when I was my late teens, early 20s, I was in modeling, and I actually auditioned for Twilight because I wanted to try acting. But the way that we read the script was the scene where Tinsel Corey got the part that I auditioned for, and by all means, she was like #1 young actor in the Indigenous community, and I'm sure she's still out there. But it was so funny because I'm like reading the script, and it was a scene where she comes in and she's like, oh, you're the vampire girl. And she's like, and you're the wolf girl. And like, we read it completely wrong. I'm like, yeah, acting is definitely not for me.
That's such a funny story. Just by chance, because I moved, right? So this was Justin Rain came to the city of Calgary on 2014, and he gave away all of these, like he'd signed them right there. And I'm like, well, I need that for my Twilight collection. So I totally got that.
I love that. That's awesome.
I've never seen or read Twilight.
Oh my God.
Honestly, like today, you would be like so offended. But back then, there was no representation. So this was like, yeah, Team Werewolf.
Yeah, exactly.
Good to know.
Yep.
Good old Taylor Lautner.
I know, he's such a little sweetheart.
And they put the wig on him too. I'm like, oh man. Now that I look back, I'm like, wow.
Right. I'm sad about it now too, but at the time we had no representation. So it was
Very
like
true.
the best we got. And that's why we're on this podcast.
I have to argue with that a little bit. We did have quite a bit of representation, maybe not in mainstream, but we definitely had like the Indigenous entertainment industry like coming up. There was a lot of different actors and stuff that were trying to get into that mainstream. I don't think a lot of them were at that time, but definitely now I see a lot more representation.
Isn't it great? I even think of
entertainment,
Adam Beach, who's been, doing this forever. Michelle Thrush, doing this forever. So many great folks for us to look up to. I watched Corner Gas, and we had one of our, fellas as a RCMP. And I'm sad to say, but they always became my favorite character for no other reason than that was the only representation I would see on the mainstream. So, but I think today is so different. Reservation Dogs, obviously, is such a, fun thing to watch. Rutherford Falls cracked me right up. So yeah, we're getting there. We have lots of really good representation today. So that makes me happy.
Yeah, I don't want to stay on the Twilight topic for too long, but funny thing about that movie was that part that Taylor Lautner had gotten. Part of that role was to cut the braid off. So there was people that were qualified and very much good enough for that role that were Indigenous, but no one wanted to cut their hair. They wanted them to cut their hair. So
how come I have never heard that before this moment? I'm so glad you shared that.
Yeah. I wouldn't have known that if I didn't know like certain people that were auditioning for that role.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was part of the agreement was for them to have a braid and then for them to cut their hair.
Wild.
I don't know if that's like, that would be a really great panel discussion, literally for an hour with all of the main stars that we know, because that's just so, well, it's a spiritual issue. I don't know. Anyway, please, Theodore, I've seen you want to kind of chime in, so please.
My son has long hair.
Yeah.
I've never cut his hair since he was born. His dad actually has long hair, and he's the only one out of all of his childhood friends who still has his hair. And yeah, it's past his butt. He's just got this really long, beautiful hair, and that's his pride and his power and his respect, right? And so, yeah, he's never ever wanted to cut it, and he's very careful about, people wanting to touch it. And it's like, teaching him, that's like your private part. You don't just let anybody touch it. That's power, and it's sacred, and it's a part of you. So that's how he treated it, and he still treats it that way today. And so I'm very proud of him to still be having his long hair when all of his childhood friends no longer have that. Some of them are growing it out, like trying to come back with it, and
Yeah.
and that's great. That's wonderful, that they're finding their way home. And yeah, but that's something that I'm very proud of my son for continuing to have.
Yeah, no, I'm really proud of him for that too, if you ever get a chance, because to me, it's a really hard battle to talk about. And funny enough, my last podcast, I talked about a woman coming up to me just wanting to touch my medallion and how violated I felt from her doing that. But the weirdest thing was I had my drum and the stick was pointing out. So she literally walked into my drum and my stick the way she went to grab my medallion. So it's like as I've been taught, my drum has spirit, and I felt like my drum was protecting me. And I just, it's shocking to me the violation that people think was, if I was white, I would never go up to some stranger and grab their like necklace and say, that's so pretty, right? I would never do that, but yet it's perfectly acceptable. And people give me a hard time for being white passing, but I'm like, well, when I'm in my ribbon skirt and wearing my medallion, I'm native enough for people to want to violate my boundaries. A lot. My goodness. So yeah, so let's talk about some of the work that you've been doing, because I talk a lot, obviously you heard me talk about economic oppression and how that's systemic, and here you both are trying to work really hard of helping folks through this ridiculous system that we have. So I'd love to hear more about the work you're doing.
You can go first.
So yeah, I've been in my position as a facilitator for almost a year now. And I started out in November with just throwing it out on Zoom. So I run a financial literacy program called Money Moccasins. And the reason why I called it Money Moccasins is because it's a financial wellness journey. And we have been barefoot in terms of walking this pathway that we've been put on. We've been put on this, and so to be able to, when you're going somewhere, what do? You put on your shoes, right? So for me, it was, putting on moccasins and being able to walk this path a bit easier. But you need materials to make those moccasins, and that's what my program does, is give you all of the materials as tools to create that tool that is to help you along this journey, because it's lifelong, and moccasins last for a very long time. They're durable, and that's what they were made for. And so yeah, it was just recognizing and in doing my work, finding out the numbers of what we actually are. And I was just telling Kim this morning, I did a little bit further of a dig, and so we're at 1.6 million. Here in Treaty 7, we are around 28,000 of all 5 nations combined. And so top to bottom, coast to coast, they've got us counted at 1.6 million. So we'd be roughly just over the size of Calgary. But in doing some more digging there, they counted a lot of Métis in that number. I thought it was all First Nations, but it was actually a lot of Métis and Inuit. So once you take out the Métis and the Inuit number, when you're looking at First Nations, we're just over 900,000. So there's actually less than 1 million of us, and we're actually very rare. And it was very a staggering number, like a bucket of cold water thrown on me, and I was just like, oh my God, like, growing up, seeing all of the natives and knowing that we are here and we're still here. But to actually put a number to it was very shocking. And then it started to make sense to me about why we are so, it's so hard to find somebody like us in a position of leadership or of support, and to be able to create that and have those spaces is something that wasn't there before. But now we are in these places of people understanding. Once the children came out, those are stories that we already knew. But once they came out, that was a confirmation, and that was, I felt, an awakening for them, that they need to really take a look at the damage that's been done and start to repair that and create those resources for us, to empower us, to bring us up to their baseline. We have a completely unique baseline across the world. We're the only ones, everybody else had their parents and their grandparents, and we are down here without them. They've had stability, wealth, love and nurturing, whereas ours was completely damaged. Anytime we tried to grow economically, we were stifled. We weren't allowed to sell our crops. We weren't allowed to buy machinery.
I'm just going to interject, and for folks who are listening to this, if you read the book Lost Harvest, which I've plugged thousands of times in this stupid show, this is what she's talking about. Clearing the Plains, another great book about these policies that she's talking about. So I just want to plug those books so that folks do their research, and I know you're speaking truth.
Yes, and I only speak to my truth. And so, realizing and recognizing these things that have hindered us and why we are the way we are, right? And speaking at different functions and to different groups of participants, and I keep my classes strictly Indigenous. I do not allow any non-Indigenous into our circles of learning, because I don't need to be educating somebody on what residential school is. That is up to them to take that upon themselves and make that a responsibility to teach themselves and their children. If I had to learn what they taught me about themselves and their children, then it should absolutely go the other way. And so we have that space to, we don't have to worry about being judged. We don't have to worry about our safety. If we want to talk about residential school and its impact, then we have that opportunity. It's not something that we have to talk about, but if we want to address it, we understand where we come from, and we've been through that. My mother attended residential school from the age of 4 to 14. And so, I know firsthand everything that she's been through, and everything that trickled down onto me. And so being that cycle breaker is where we're at in this point of, having this path being set for us, that we are to get over it and assimilate with everybody else, is something that I'm changing. I'm deconstructing that and changing that stereotype and breaking that cycle and giving us a new path, because I've been down that one. And so my classes and workshops, they, talk about that and how we can totally change and change this course we're on. And here's a different path, and here's some moccasins to walk. And this is, a container for your water, and how to tend to your fire, which water I refer to as money, and, fire is credit, and just really making the material resonate with us where we understand it, because we're taught that everything has a spirit, and that's how to respect it, create that respect for, the items in this Western world. And so,
can I just pause you? That is amazing. Yeah, that resonates with me as an Indigenous woman. Listening to what you're saying, that resonates with me so strong. So thank you for framing it that way.
Yes, thank you. But that's my work, and that's my passion, because there's only so many of us. I'm like, all right, this is it. This is our time to strike. This is Indigenous Rise. Let's get after it. Let's learn their ways. Let's teach our children. Let's, change that path and change the systems, right? Eventually, that's where I want to go with this, is changing those policies. Because who said, what department, who mandated that it was, $229 is what you're given to live on welfare on the reserve. And it's a system that's been in place, for forever. It's still in place, and there's no development. It's still that stifling. And so how do you live on $229 a month? I always get asked. Well, I've done it for a year. It's tricky, but you become extremely resilient and extremely resourceful.
Yeah.
And but now, when you start getting larger amounts of water, you need to learn how to have a tool to hold it, right?
Sure.
And change that and get buckets and continuously build on that. A drip at a time, it's going to build up, right? As long as you have something to put it in, because other than that, they're just pouring it in your hands. And what are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
Right? It's all just going to run through. And so, yeah, just making that point and empowering, knowing that, 2 years ago, I was a student of this material and seeing all that it could be for us and how it's necessary and needed, a needed resource in all of our communities, and being able to deliver that 2 years later,
Yeah.
right? Going from student to teacher, and having the life experience behind it, understanding the realness of living on the reserve and living off of the reserve, and all of those barriers that we face both on and off. It's a very hard, if you don't know how to navigate it, if you're not strong enough, you really have to draw that strength. And that's who we are. We're just so resilient. We're built that way. And we're still here. And so changing those systems to make things, getting that equal playing field, that's what my passion is, to reach that point.
Hallelujah. Thank you. That was a beautiful, beautiful explanation about what you're doing. So I can't thank you enough for taking that time and putting it all out there, because I think we all need to understand that. And it's important to me that people hear what you just said. So thank you. Yeah. So what would you like to add?
I would definitely say, Theodora's program is needed within all of our communities, because I also resonated with it as well. So I never grew up knowing what credit meant, or how to get a credit card, what it means to have good credit, what bad credit is. I don't know anyone in my house or in my family that's ever owned a home. So it's I already feel so far behind, right? And we look around and, we see our friends that are non-Indigenous, and it's well, how do they get that? How do they have all of this? And we don't. And it's only been over the past few years I've started to understand what it means to have good credit, and building that up and having those financial goals. Even though that's not what, even this is what Theodora kind of explains it as, is that's not where our wealth comes from, those material things. So but it is good to have, in the society that we're living in, and to be able to pass something down for our kids. So yeah, I guess what I'm doing right now is, well, actually I can kind of start where I started. So basically I'm quite new into my career. I've been in my career for about 4 years. I started working out at one of the shelters. Crazy experience working there, a lot of violence, a lot of overdoses, and just coming from the type of background that I come from, the trauma right from childhood up into adulthood. It was really triggering for me. I was there for almost 2 years, but I couldn't do it anymore. Seeing people dying right in front of you and having to, give them naloxone, give them CPR mouth to mouth. it was just too much, you know. So I loved working at the shelter. Like, it was such an amazing community to be a part of. And it's crazy, like when you you think about, you know, like people that are suffering from homeless or that are experiencing homelessness, you think, well, I would say that probably society thinks that, you know, there's no sense of community there, but I've never ever felt the sense of community that I did when I was working in the shelter. Like, people just absolutely love each other. They take care of each other. You know, they have street family, they have street moms, street dads, street brothers and sisters. And I was just like, oh my God.
And even when they get out of it, like, they're still, their
Yes.
heart is on the streets. Like, I
Yeah,
know
and
quite a few folks in our community, and it doesn't matter now that they have a house. They're still, all of their energy and effort and free time goes into helping street people all the time.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's so hard for some people to actually leave homelessness too, is because they've gotten that sense of family, you know, and then when they go and live into their own house and they're all alone, well, it's like it is a culture shock for them to be alone like that, you know. And I think that's why a lot of people cycle in and out of that. So yeah, that's a whole other topic. But then I went
It
into
is, but before we move on from it, let's remember the longest night of the year. That night every year is the night we remember all we've lost to homelessness. And I think it's important because there's two calendars. There's the colonial Easter, Christmas traditional one, and then there's ours. And like, that is a really important date for me, because I think like, it shows to me the day of genocide that colonizers have imposed on our people, and these are our casualties as a result. And I know a lot of non-Indigenous just have no concept of this whatsoever, but a lot of our houseless population are 60 scoop or Indian residential school survivors, or their kids, and they don't understand the trauma that has caused people to be houseless. And that said, there's also even the non-Indigenous. It's an example of their poor eugenics policies against people who have a disability or maybe a mental health or addiction, like poor policies for all these things, right? So even the non-Indigenous that passed that day, to me, are just another example of their poor genocidal eugenics policies that are just absolutely atrocious, and they don't even understand this day exists or the cause of it or nothing. So I think it was really important, before we move on, just to acknowledge the trauma you endured just by witnessing overdoses. Like, it's there are many organizations trying to take care of our folks doing overdoses, and they witness this all the time, and a lot of them don't even get paid for it. And so when we promote the Bear Clan or Street Cats or anything, there's a reason for it. And yet this is in another realm of, you know, NHL hockey and teamies for people who have no concept about the people who they actually exploit, the land that they've stolen, right? So I just wanted to honor that for a second, and I appreciate you sharing all of that. And I will let you continue on with the things you want to talk about.
Thank you, Michelle. I was just going to actually add on to that. So for the night that you're talking about, I believe that's on December 21st. Is that correct? Oh yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so after that, I went into work in the criminal justice system, and you know, it kind of fell on my lap, to be honest, going into work with the women in prisons. So kind of just rewind to why I wanted to go into that field was because speaking of Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, so my mother was in prison before I was born for a very large amount of time in prison for women in Kingston, Ontario, which is where I was born. It's shut down now because of it. Well, first of all, it was the oldest prison in Canada, but it was shut down after a series of serious events were happening there. So anyway, there was a woman named Ellen Moves Camp. She's actually, they call her one of the Unchis, which means like the grandmothers of the American Indian movement. Her and another woman named Gladys Bystander, they were the ones to go to the men in the 70s and ask them, well, what are you guys going to do about what's going on in our community? So they were really the ones to ask the men to go like in prayer and go in spirituality and stand up for their nation. So she's done a lot of work, you know, across Turtle Island in the United States and Canada. And when my mom was in prison, she was working in that prison in P4W. They were bringing culture to the women that were there, and it was actually the first prison in Canada where they were allowed to smudge. So she was actually the one to bring that to them, which created like a ripple effect, you know, across Canada. So anyway, when my mom had gotten out, Ellen had taken a liking to my mom, and she adopted her as her daughter. And then she actually delivered me at home. And then shortly after that, we had moved to South Dakota. So that's how I ended up being raised there, was because my adopted grandmother had brought in my mom and my dad down there for work. But yeah, so I had this like feeling in me. I'm like, okay, I want to work with women in prison. And I was still working at the shelter. And then I swear to God, like law of attraction is so real, because I got a message, and I actually was messaging my old boss, and I was like, yeah, like I really want to like work with women in prison. And she's like, well, why don't you come work for me? And I was like, okay. And it's like, boom, within like 2 weeks, I was going into the jail. So we would go into the remand center, help out the ladies there, and then also go down to the Lethbridge Correctional. And what a feeling, honestly, of like going into a jail, but like being the other person. Cause I remember being young and like going into cells. Sorry. You know, I don't know if everyone has experienced going into cells. Like I don't have a criminal record, but I've definitely been in cells in my youth life. So yeah, I don't know, just being like the person on the other side was like surreal. And, you know, like seeing this old building outside of Lethbridge, I think is like, I don't know how old that building is, but it is creepy. Like I can't even imagine some of the things that have happened, you know, in that building. So anyway.
Well, there's a place that needs a smudge every day, hey?
Oh.
All of Lethbridge.
Yeah. No doubt, geez. Yeah, so, and now I did actually complete 180 coming into the work that I'm doing now. So right now what we're doing is designing a Indigenous tech program for an all Indigenous cohort that's going to be launching in September. So what we're trying to do is design it from an Indigenous lens and make it really comfortable and safe for Indigenous learners to come and go into the tech industry. So we're underrepresented in that industry, which is funny because we're overrepresented in everything like the prison system. What was the other
Poverty.
one? Poverty, homelessness. And then when it comes to these big, you know, like economic game changers or these ever growing economic, you know, fields, it's like, well, we're not there. So yeah, it's just really cool to be able to be a part of what we're doing. So the direction that we're going is basically taking like the strength of the Indigenous community on social media, because you know how we're all on social media. Everyone's on social media. Everyone uses social media to communicate, you know, like all of our issues, good and bad. Like we are very, very connected on Turtle Island through social media. And that is so, so cool. And like when Theodora talks about what our population is in Canada for Indigenous people, it's like, really? It seems like there's more because of how connected we are, you know? Yeah. So what we've done is basically created a curriculum so that they'll be able to go into digital marketing, social media management, and web design.
I should be taking your course.
Yeah, well, so it's ages 18 to 40, and it's
never mind. Just kidding. Go ahead.
So 18 to 40 launches September 19th. Yeah, so if anyone is interested in that, we're going to be starting our marketing campaign pretty soon. Maybe Michelle can share some posters on Facebook or Instagram or all the other platforms out there. So
You bet I will. I'm so excited
Yeah.
to.
yeah, it's going to be really cool. There's been like moments of like, oh my God, are we going to be able to fill these spots? Are we going to be able to do this? But I think that, I don't know, like I've never heard of a tech program anywhere that's focused on Indigenous people that's mainly about social media. Like, I think it's gonna be good. So
I think it's
hopefully
going
we
to
get a
be
lot of-
revolutionary. You're going to be a guest speaker nationally across Turtle Island talking about the work you're doing. And everybody heard it here on Native Calgarian first.
Yeah. And we haven't even started our marketing campaign,
Yeah.
so look out for that. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. We're on some tight deadlines right now, so we're just trying to really, it's crunch time basically.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, and because next month is June, and that's our month. Like
Mhm.
it's like, so now we got two things we have to do. We have to like clean up all those loose ends, and then go to all these events that we can't. I'm like, now I gotta stay up
Yeah,
till 2
exactly.
and try to get this stuff done first.
Mhm.
Yeah, do you guys have any events coming up for June that we should know about?
So June 21st, our Indigenous Engagement Working Group has put together, we're putting together an event for staff and some of the partners that we work with. And so we're gonna have a meal of bison stew and bannock. I'm gonna do a fry bread demonstration. What else we got? We got
We're
some
bringing
vendors in, some powwow dancers and drummers.
yeah.
We're hopefully we'll have a teepee by then that we can set up and share some elder stories with.
Mhm.
We've got our elder Roy Bear Chief, and we've got our board member Métis Art Cunningham that will be sharing some stories and just really showing that Indigenous are welcome here at Momentum, and there is space. And what makes these programs work is Indigenous teaching Indigenous,
Mhm.
right? That's key in anything in order to reach us and retain us. Then we need to be in these positions and be seen in these positions so that we have that safe space, we have that same ground. And to be able to understand our backgrounds and not have to over explain when our lives are happening to us, because we just have some very crazy lives that nobody understands. It's so hard to if your employer or isn't understanding why you are the way we are, you are, is it, the way that I've explained it in a number of different of my speaking to people is that our job, our entire job, our whole purpose was to raise our children in balance with their environment and with themselves. And, colonization completely destroyed that. They tried to break it as much as possible. Imagine what I share with them is, imagine just an entire community whose sole purpose was to do that. And then all of a sudden there's no children, nowhere. You're not hearing laughter, you're not hearing stories, you're not, and those were gifts to us. Our children are gifts to us from Creator, and for us to have them removed so violently and never seeing them again, or them coming back and being different from all the damage and trauma that they incurred at the hands of others. And sometimes they came back, they were different, or sometimes they came back and there were no parents, dying from broken hearts, and or starvation or disease or whatever else impacted us, and breaking that. And so that's what I put in their minds is imagine never seeing that, and then having to carry on and get over it and just get back in line with everybody else. Like that didn't just happen. and just have a normal life, but yet not having any of those parenting skills or financial skills or social skills or education doors opening for us, for helping us to get to that baseline. And seeing, so, you know, I tell them, when you see that person that is broken down on the street and is in their life of having, that's intergenerational trauma. That is the repercussions of residential school, and you have no idea what they've been through and what they're continuing to go through. It's not a choice. It was not ever a choice. It was a path that they were put on. And so that is where it comes in, to change that path, opening those eyes and you know, having them listen to our voices, because it is us who need to be in these places to tell them it's okay. You know, we're creating this space. You're welcome here. You're okay. You know, nothing's wrong with you. That's just the way we are. And we can change that. We can help one another, right? It's always a question of, to me, it's always been a question of our elders asking, what are you going to do for your people, right? And so this is my purpose. This is my drive. This is my reason for living, is to help us get through these situations that we were put in, and heal ourselves, begin that healing. But we need that space created first. We need those ears open. We need those hearts open. We need those doors open. You know, educating themselves on our plights and how can they help? Well, start writing those letters, change those things. You know, learning about us. There's less than 1 million of us. I'm 1 in a million. She's 1 in a million. You're 1 in a
I'm
million.
1 in a million.
Yeah. You know, and we're the only ones with stardust in our DNA. You know, we've always told them that we come from the stars, and we do.
Yep.
Nobody else has stardust in their DNA. So I think that's very something to take home with you, you know, is that we are so very special, and, you know, to be treated with respect and dignity and honored, because we do carry a lot of, you know, teachings with us about how we were stewards of the land and how we raised our children. And, you know, I'm the first one in my family to raise my child that didn't have to attend residential school. This is not that long ago. You know, you start talking about residential school and people think you're talking about, you know, 200 years ago. No, you know, this is still very fresh and very new.
This is how I
And
remind people. Well, one of our brothers, he brings up, if you want to be my lover, you got to be with my friends, because that song was released the year that the last
Oh my
residential school
God.
closed. And I tell people, I graduated high school in 94. And like officially in the TRC, it says 96 was when it was closed. But as we learned with Cowessness First Nation, that was 97. So to give perspective, like you are talking to somebody who should have been in Indian residential school, right? So that, like, just to give that, so I totally agree with what you're saying here. Just really, really grateful. Actually, both of you have spoke so strong in this entire interview, and I hope people are inspired and understand, you know, when I say some of the things I say at my opening and my closing, you're living it, you're talking about it, you're being open and honest about it. And I'm really honored that you would both talk about it so willingly. And yeah, if you need people to fill your slots, I'll if you let some, you know, 45-year-old into your program, I'll come. But vice versa, both of you, I will be promoting your work anytime.
That's awesome. I was going to say that might be something for us to keep in mind for next year's cohort, because I think like within the Indigenous community, like how many creative people we have out there, you know, whether it's like with podcasts, art, there's so many entrepreneurs out there. There's so many people like you, Michelle, that have, you know, platforms and, you know, like, you know, we were talking earlier about like the algorithms on Facebook and stuff. Well, like, I don't quite understand that. And I don't think a lot of people do. And that's why it's hard for a lot of people to promote their businesses. So like one of our goals for the graduates for this Indigenous cohort going through the tech program is to possibly take our entrepreneurship apprenticeship program here, and then be able to utilize all of the skills that they've developed through their training. But even being at a craft market, when was that, last month? I was talking to a couple of people and they're like, oh my God, that would be so cool to take, because like they have the art, they have all of these beautiful things that they want to sell, and to make our Indigenous economy stronger, but it's like the skills are lacked there on like that specific area. So like that's why we really want to tap into that, because there's such potential. There's so much potential out there.
Just to give you an idea, like there is a part of ethics for me too, right? So for example, like white people too, I am one of the most successful, longest running podcasts there are, period. End of discussion. Because
Wow.
most podcasts have very short windows. And as you both know, you get small, short little grant fundings from small pockets of government here and there. So then you have a small, short little program that only lasts for 5 seconds. And that is so incredibly frustrating, because we would never do that to K to 12 or something, right? Regardless, because I don't know how to monetize, I haven't. But also, I don't want a sponsor like Shell taking over my podcast, because I can't ethically say Shell is a great company, they just kill all the Indigenous women nationally, globally. I can't do that, but I can take their money in order to go to your program or something, and as you all know, everything here is sponsored by oil companies when it comes to June or such. And because that's the people that will give us money, because the governments are very sketchy with the funding that they'll give. And the other thing is because I'm not technically a nonprofit and I'm not technically a business registered under the colonial registration of the Alberta government, I don't qualify for nothing, right? So this is just totally a self-funded, self-motivated podcast. And so there's those ethics of Indigenous economy compared to colonial economy, right? So even for me, like trying to figure out how to make peace with certain things, and honestly, the LGBTQ2+ and art community have been the best ones for me to kind of draw from. And not that I've gotten any of their money, but the support I have, So anyway, that's just something I'm going to throw at you as you go through this, because I don't fit in anything right now. And if it wasn't for my husband being able to sustain this, I wouldn't have one of the best podcasts. Like, I'm not Joe Rogan by any stretch. I just mean that statistically, most podcasts end in a short time frame, and especially if you're Indigenous, right? So yeah, just weird how this all comes together. And yet, like we were talking about algorithms, trying to promote ourselves through like the Moccasin Telegraph and such, like there are barriers that we face that are different than non-Indigenous. So anyway, really appreciate you both coming on my show. Any lasting things that you want to add to anything I might have forgot to add there?
I just wanted to say that we both work for a nonprofit organization, so all of our programming is free. And I have expanded my program to reach all of Treaty 7. So I can go on Nation and do in-person facilitations. And that's something that they didn't have before. And that's something.
Can I pause you right there? It's a huge deal. And the reason why I worked for a nonprofit that would only deal with the 12 communities of the Greater Forest Lawn. And they had an issue with me going beyond it, despite not, because they didn't understand Treaty 7. They didn't understand Indigenous, urban Indigenous. They didn't understand, and they didn't want to. Right. So the funding miraculously got cut. So what you're doing is actually really revolutionary, because Calgarians especially have such a narrow understanding of what Treaty 7 is, which is why I do a land acknowledgement teaching, free for Indigenous, nonprofits, you obviously have to pay, but that bigger picture, they just don't get it. Yeah, so really revolutionary, and good job on that.
Yes, thank you. I actually use their land acknowledgement, because if you're going to acknowledge that you're on Treaty 7 territory, then you need to include all of us. I wanted to bring this home. I'm from the South, and their border wasn't accommodating. And I was like, if I'm leaving out my people, that's my people, I want to bring it home to. And you give me that remove that boundary, expand it for all of Treaty 7, then you also reach, a Kainai as well.
Yeah.
And so in bringing us all together in unison and being able to lift us all up at the same time, that just made more sense to me, and it made sense to them in order to continue with their truth and reconciliation journey. And it was understanding that they need to include us all.
Hallelujah. Thank Creator. Any other lasting thoughts?
I was just going to say, so we are going to be starting in-person info sessions in June. So I would say just look out for our marketing campaign. It's going to be everywhere. We're going to be at a lot of events this summer. Theodora and I will probably be at the Aboriginal Awareness powwow. Hopefully the hand games, we're just working on getting a booth there. We're going to be at the Calgary Library powwow coming up. We're going to be everywhere. So look out for us.
That sounds amazing. Tell me about the hand games one, only because my daughter has been learning a lot from Peter Daniels, and he really believes in hand games for everybody. So if I can get my daughter in that, I'd really like that, but they may not have a team, but then I'll tell Peter, and then maybe we could create a team, really like a team.
I haven't played hand games since I was in about grade 3, but I was looking up some videos the other day and I was like, holy.
So fun. Well, my people, that's like their big thing, but they exclude women. So my hope is that, when I see stuff from home, I look at it and I share it anyway. But, like my daughter is identifying as Two-Spirit. And I think there's a really big Two-Spirit community, because like you were talking about how little our numbers are, but yet our Two-Spirit are so strong. And I think it's because, we were kind of talking about it earlier with colonized makeup, like the colonized concept of sexes is so wild. And I think our youth are like, yeah, no, nothing of this makes sense. I guess I'm Two-Spirit then, because of the colonial construct of what sex has to be. Or gender roles, I should say, that more so. So I don't know. Anyway, that's a off topic. I apologize. Thank you for coming on my show, and know that you're both welcome anytime, separately, together, whatever you'd like to do, promote whatever program that you're working on. And I think you're doing 100% fabulous work. In 2013, when we were trying to run Canada Learning Bond programs and such, like it was really hard to, basically the work you're doing, Theodora, with trying to give that concept of economic construct. Like we were having to do that and try to get people to sign up for a Canada Learning Bond. So of course it wasn't successful. And we just did yet another program with Chaos. Really love Chaos, by the way. They did a whole section on Canada Learning Bond that was really Indigenous focused, and used some of their program money just to make Indigenous centered artists work in order to talk about language, etc., etc. So it was really positive. But that bigger picture, that there's just such a gap there between Canada, the government of Canada, and Indigenous economics. So I'm just really grateful you both came on here to give your perspectives, talk about the programs you have coming up, and you're welcome back anytime. Thank you. Masi Cho.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So honored. Okay, so I'm going to do my exit, and you both are welcome to chime in, because this is just like my Indigenous book club. My Indigenous book club is Indigenous centered. So white people can be there and listen, but they speak last. They speak after we do, because we never got a chance to speak. So I think it's really important, Theodora, that your program is Indigenous only. And I just wanted to encourage anyone listening, because I'm no longer affiliated with Calgary Public Library, speaking of boundaries, that you had to have a library card in order to be a part of this. And this is another example. As far as I know, I'm the only Indigenous book club, and I've been running for 6 years. So anyone is welcome to come. It is open to anybody. We did the chapter 1 and 2 of the National Inquiry. Our next book is The Indian in the Cabinet by Jody Wilson Raybould. Then we'll be doing the National Inquiry 3 and 4, Unreconciled by Jesse Wente. That's August. September, National Inquiry chapters 5 and 6. October 10th, Res Rules by Clarence Louis, and all of the authors have said they're coming, except Jody, because I think she is going to, she already, I contacted her too late, but she might come, even if for 10 minutes. So in case she does, you might want to come to this, just message me. National Inquiry in November, 7 and 8, and then December is Standoff by Bruce McIver. So, and also, if you're in Calgary, join the Reconciliation Action Group, please, because we need all voices talking about all 94 calls to action, not this limited scope of maybe we'll have a land acknowledgement in our email. Like, it's ridiculous what the non-Indigenous community is doing. If you're not in Calgary, there are reconciliation committees nationally. If there isn't one, start one, and then I will support you. I will have you on my show if that's what it takes in order to let people know. But they're usually there, and the churches do need to do more. Wanted to do yet another plug for Naomi Sayers, who's out in Ontario. I know half of my listeners are in there. She's at the Sioux. She put out a really fantastic article about the sexual harassment, racist sexual harassment she's receiving right now. If you're in Calgary, I'm helping Marilyn North again. I would love to see you do that. Edmonton has Jody Stonehouse. She's running. So, you know, if you don't see Indigenous people in your areas running, then that's on you. That's an exclusion, of course, by these harmful colonial parties. Anyway, another story for another day. I'm proud that this podcast has given solutions and created cultural safety training, cultural first aid, and all of them to create a safer space for Indigenous, people of color, those with disabilities, and LGBTQ2+ to speak. I want to say thank you to Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Fritkin of heretohelp.bc.ca and their little piece on what is Indigenous cultural safety and why I should care about it. If you have not read it after hearing so many of my podcasts, what the heck? Their work, along with those cultural action tools, I've said 100 times in my podcast, so please support Indigenous work like that as part of your reconciliation work and settler understandings. I'm just lucky enough to highlight and repeat them here. Lateral violence and internalized racism is a part of the Indigenous healing journey that we have to work on. So I highly recommend anybody who comes from a marginalized community go to racialequitytools.org. What is Internalized Racism by Donna Bevins to help you on your healing journey. Also, we have to address, anti-Blackness, ableism, homophobia, transphobia that we have in our community. But alternatively, for non-Indigenous people, man, you got lots more work to do. Do's and don'ts for bystander intervention by American Friends Service Committee. They have a great piece at afsc.org on do's and don't bystander intervention. So this is the type of thing that you would utilize to, if you're on the C train and you've seen a Muslim woman being targeted, or an Indigenous woman being targeted, or anybody being targeted, you know, just some ideas of how to intervene in a positive way rather than calling the police. Indigenous have been talking about our issues, sharing our traumas in reports, commissions, and public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor our words, honor the treaties, listen to politicians in their policies and platforms. If they don't recognize marginalized with gender within their budgets, we literally were just talking about Indigenous economics, but if they don't even include gender equity plus, then if they're cutting violence prevention programs and services, Indigenous education, Indigenous programs, uterus health choices, gay-straight alliances, lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disabilities, know that your vote to that party is directly negatively and impacting marginalized people. Demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, their recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the multiple reports about child welfare reform, violence prevention, and now 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit. Denying those reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing racism and sexism in the educational, health, justice institutions, with multiple reports that say these things. Demand change from election platforms and politicians. They don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, and sexism. They literally have zero business running. This should be understood by all parties, local politicians, community organizations, sports clubs, etc. If you were to Google how non-Indigenous Canadians become allies, there's so many resources now. You have no excuses. If you're experiencing emotional distress after anything we talked about today and want to talk, call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 1-855-242-3310. It's toll free, open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. You can also text them on their website, hopeforwellness.ca. If more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, you can call 844-413-6649. It is a national toll-free 24/7 crisis line open to anyone. More locally, I'll plug Awuton Healing Lodge. Develop safety plans. You are so important to me and I want you safe. Non-Indigenous, there are distress center lines in your area and usually a functioning 211, or you can call 833-456-4566. For 60 Scoops, in Alberta, we have the 60 Scoop Indigenous Society of Alberta at ssisa.ca. If you're in Alberta and you see or experience racism, you can report it, act to end racism, and text it at 587-507-3838. The following are 2 LGBTQ plus crisis supports that are available in most areas across Canada. These will give you nationwide options of who you can call, and you can find a lot of this with Trevor Project at lifevoice.ca. You can call the Trans Lifeline in Canada at 877-330-6366, and for the youth, 866-844-7386. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation has faced it. This is self-care and how I take my power back. That's why I started this podcast, to speak freely without interruption, without tone police, without leadership shaming, without gaslighting questions, as many people don't want to hear Indigenous opinion, but sure want to tell us theirs, usually by people who don't know anything about colonialism, our rights, our vigils, our protests, and the constant surveillance our people endured. I and many others share this info on microaggressions daily, so it is unacceptable to say them anymore. Learn about being trauma informed. Folks like me are dealing with internalized racism as well and gatekeeping, so please do that work so that we can stop this as well. What else do I want to say? Masi Cho to my ancestors, my granny, my mom, what strength looks like through your examples. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt. My stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family and roots, and teaching me to be a proud Calgarian. Through her, I'm a second generation proud Calgarian, but if you are non-Indigenous, do not call yourself a native Calgarian. Thank you to my husband, Darcy, for producing and editing the show. On top of being my husband, my childhood friend, father of our child, and support down my journey of the Red Road, he has witnessed decades of racism and sexism. To our child, we are blessed to learn from daily. We are honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. And I hope my daughter and my family will be proud in the future, trying to discuss these present day issues in a way that they can understand down the road. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or your questions. I also have a YouTube channel. You can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And to all those Calgary rabbits, I'll give you side eye. You're lucky I'm not tradish. And my beautiful cousin who came down to Calgary once responded, or you'd be in my dish. Thanks, ladies, for coming on my show.